Good morning, everybody.
Good morning.
Thank you all for coming. My name is Daniel Llata, and we are here today to celebrate the life and legacy of my dear mother, Elva Llata, wife, mother, grandmother, great-grandmother, and close friend to so many. Her birth name was Elva Socorro Boubion Llata. My mother hated her middle name, Socorro, and she would admonish me whenever I mentioned it, and especially when I told others that her middle name was Socorro at all. Sorry, Mom. Elva was born on the 6th day of June in 1937 in Nogales, Sonora, Mexico. She was the youngest and final survivor of 8 children: Enrique, Estela, Alfredo, Eleanor, who was known as Lloyd, Roberto, Adalberto, and Josephine, who we all fondly called Nena. This was in the midst of the Great Depression, and although the rest of the family had previously settled in Los Angeles, California, work was hard to come by in those years, so her parents, Alfredo Boubion and Beatriz Durant, relocated to Nogales, Sonora, where my grandfather found a job painting houses. The older siblings were all born in the United States. Elva was the only one of the bunch born in Mexico. Elvita, or Vita, as her sisters called her, lived in Sonora until she was about 12 years old. For Elva, moving to the United States of America was simply a matter of crossing over the street. In this case, International Street, which was the border, forming the border between Nogales, Sonora, and Nogales, Mexico, Arizona, excuse me. Folks on either side would simply walk across the street in either direction to shop or to visit friends, and then cross back over into the other country at their leisure. Elva could speak no English at the time, and a nice lady who was her new neighbor noticed that the young Elvita enjoyed comic books. So the lady gave her a stack of American comics in English and helped her to read them out loud. And this was her first introduction to the English language. From Nogales, Arizona, the family eventually returned to California by way of Tucson, where my mother attended St. Agnes High School in Los Angeles, graduating in 1956. And one day, my mother's dear sister, Nena, who everyone knew as Nena, she was Josephine, invited my mother to a party where she met her future husband, Raul Gomez Llata, my father. And the rest is history. The two were married in 1957 and would raise 4 children: Marta, Raul, yours truly, and finally Elizabeth. The new family settled in Hawthorne, California, where we all grew up. In the 1960s and 70s, it was not considered fashionable for people to speak another language in the United States, so English was the language of our home, with the exception of when our extended family would come for a visit, in which case we kids could never quite understand what was going on. Eventually, at least my sisters and I took it upon ourselves to learn Spanish on our own, so our parents could no longer use Spanish as a secret language to talk about us under our noses. Marta and Raulito, for the most part, were the better behaved of the bunch, but then came me. I remember overhearing on many an occasion when the mother's friends would remark, "Oh, what sweet children you have raised," and I would often doubt that I was included in that broad generalization, and with very good reason. Indeed, I was the holy terror of the family, the proverbial black sheep, or more accurately, the pink one. Once, when we were attending Mass at St. Joseph's Catholic Church in Hawthorne, and my mother had promised me that if I was a good little boy during Mass, that she'd take us all to the small amusement park across the street, which we call Los Caballitos because of the little horsies on the merry-go-round there. During the Mass, when the priest was about midway through his homily, I took it upon myself to stand up in the church, and I basically told the priest to stop talking because I wanted to see Los Caballitos. And I don't think we went to Los Caballitos on that day after all. But my mother did say, "Danny, if you had been my firstborn son, I would never have had any more children." Elva here was perhaps somewhat easier on our parents, but not by a lot, because she and I would torture our long-suffering mother by meticulously picking apart the meanings of words and phrases, both arcane and pedestrian, debating upon their most unlikely and inane applications to absurd scenarios, until our mother would finally throw up her hands into the air in consternation and exclaim, "If you kids would spend as much time on something that actually mattered, you would be multimillionaires by now." We'd also torment her by putting the groceries away in all the wrong places, like the dishwasher detergent in the refrigerator, or perishables in the pantry, or orange juice under the sink. Our parents loved each other very dearly and were always quite affectionate with each other to the end. And had we youngsters been old enough at the time to appreciate the term "get a room," we might have used it daily. To the very end, the two would walk around anywhere, hand in hand, whether just taking the dogs out for a walk or going to the store. My sisters and I called our parents Uni and Goonie, and we would sing, "Uni and Goonie are doing it again." As a family, we always had dogs growing up. Queenie was the first, and Heather and Sasha. Then there were Loki and Socrates, Maggie and Maya, finally Sherlock, who's still around today. But my mother's favorites, I think, were Maggie and Maya, who were two little spoiled dachshund brats who peed all over the floors, and they were cute to look at, even though they would nibble at my ankles every time I walked out, even of my own room. But my mother loved them, so I tolerated them anyway. My mother was a great cook, especially when she made homemade Mexican food. Back in the 70s, it was considered de rigueur to prepare such frightening American abominations, I will call them, as liver and onions, or ambrosia salad, and jello mold curiosities with cottage cheese and grated carrots, and Miracle Whip with olives and pimientos, and who knows what else. And we children would protest and say, "Mom, can't we have taquitos today? You make those so well." And eventually the superior Mexican food would triumph over the green bean casserole. And our favorites were the rolled taquitos. They could be pork or chicken, and they were Nate's favorite too, and also our brother Raul. And what was on tortillas for breakfast. But my favorite of all was when our aunties would come over, Tia Nena and Tia Lloyd, and they'd make handmade tamales from scratch. Those were always my favorite. Elva was a very pious woman, and in her younger years, she'd always wear her veil whenever entering a Catholic church. Once as a youngster, she entered the church wearing a short-sleeved dress. I don't mean the sleeveless one, just short-sleeved, but the priest pinched her shoulder really hard and dragged her out of the church. She remembers. She wore her veil from then on. Anyone who knew my mother would agree that she was a very funny lady, especially when she had no intention at all of being funny. She'd often appear kind of dazed when others would burst into laughter at whatever zinger she had just delivered. And she'd follow along with the laugh as if to say, "I meant to say that." And once, my favorite was at the shrine of the Virgin of Guadalupe in Mexico City, when the priest was coming down with the holy water, sprinkling onto the congregation. I was standing right beside her, and as the priest approached us with the holy water, she covered my face with her hands and said, "Don't let the holy water touch you, you'll turn into a chicharrón." Fried pork rind. Elva was always quite the fashion icon for as long as I can remember. She would make her own clothes in the latest fashions back in the days when it was more economical to do so and to go shopping. Our Nana Vicky, who was an expert seamstress, would help her put together impressive wardrobes of contemporary attire with rich fabrics and all the brightest colors, and You'll see in the slideshow later at Merrill Gardens that she often resembled Liz Taylor. And our friends would comment that we were like the Brady Bunch family, but I think we dressed more like the Partridge family. She was an avid tennis player and enjoyed competing in local tournaments with her many friends. Experiencing the world was a gift from our parents. As a family, we would take many camping trips all around the American West and beyond in our Ford F-150 pickup truck with a camper attached to the bed. Elva especially loved the campfire talks presented by the National Park Rangers, whether the topic highlighted the constellations above our heads or the geology, flora, and fauna which surrounded us. Through our travels, we encountered bears and bats, and even a chipmunk that bit her toe, thinking that it was a berry of some kind. And a massive windstorm that hurled giant pine cones, toppling tall trees onto the crushed cars and cabins. In later years, Raul and Marta had their families of their own. My parents would travel with Elizabeth and me to such places as Spain, France, Morocco, Japan, and also within Mexico, where we visited Mayan pyramids and much beyond there. Eventually, my parents would travel the world with their friends, visiting China, Europe, and many other interesting places as well. And one of our final big trips together, the last big trip I took with my parents, was to Reykjavik in Iceland. I remember standing with my parents, staring up at night into the Arctic night sky at the Aurora Borealis, and my mother remarked that when she was a poor little girl growing up in rural Mexico, she never imagined she'd be watching the Northern Lights in Iceland one day. Elva especially loved her family, her large family, including her 8 grandchildren, 3 great-grandchildren who all knew her as Lolita, as her grandchildren had difficulty pronouncing the word abuelita, Spanish for grandmother. That name stuck, and forevermore she'll be remembered in our family as Lolita. Although our childhood was idyllic in many ways, we also had to endure the tragedy suffered by normal families. When our brother Raul passed away on the 6th of February in 2006, at the age of only 45. I'm not sure my mother ever really recovered, and in fact none of us ever will, though we can now be consoled in the knowledge that mother and son are now together, reunited, and that is a comfort to us all. When my parents moved to Merrill Gardens, we were naturally concerned about how well our mother would adapt into her new surroundings. But within a few weeks, I would call my mom and she'd answer the phone. "Danny, I can't talk right now. I'm too busy playing canasta or pinochle with my friends." To which I said, "Mom, that is the perfect response. Please stay busy." In her final years in Merrill Gardens, when my father's memory began to falter, she opted to remain at her husband's side in memory care to ensure that Dad would be in the place where he needed to be when the time came. One of her final gifts, the final gift that I gave to my mother on our final outing to Gate Harbor, which was early last year, I gave her a pair of novelty socks emblazoned with the words, "I love my asshole children." And I bet she's wearing those socks in heaven right now. I'll probably get 10 Hail Marys for that one. Heaven isn't far enough, Mom, I know. In the past year or so, when my mother's health began to decline, it became easier for her to communicate with the rest of us by a text message than by actually speaking on the phone. And the final text I ever received from my mother was in November of 2023, and it reads, "Why are you coming now? I thought you were coming on Christmas. I'm not dying yet, you know. What did the girls tell you? They're all lying." Yeah. So, Mom, we thank you and Dad for all you have given us throughout our lives. And you may be gone from this earth, but we ask for your continued guidance from your home in heaven. From Dad and from all of your family, Marta and John, Stephanie, Andrew, Axel, and Roland, Brittany, Mark, Kason, and little baby on its way, Raoul and Evan, and Karen, Daniel and Maddie, David, Hannah, and Steve, yours truly, and Bill, Elizabeth, Brendan, Tristan, Eleanor, and Nate, and from all your relatives and many friends, we will love you forever, dear Elva.